Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jo Davich. I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of author events. If you would like to find out more about the Georgia Center for the Book and see our archive of virtual events that we've been presenting for the past few years, visit georgiacenterforthebook.org and you will see our digital archive. You can also go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to see our latest uploads and author videos. A few things before we begin our event tonight. We have enabled the closed captioning. So if you need to use that particular service, you will find the CC button at the top or the bottom of your device. And when you click on that button, you can modify the font size to make it as large or as small as you require to make it legible. I'd also like to let you know that we have enabled chat this evening. So feel free to leave your questions either in the chat or use the Q&A feature. You'll find that button at the top or the bottom of the screen. And when you click on it, a chat window will open, and please feel free to type your questions there. We will, of course, be using those questions after our formal presentation to ask both of our speakers this evening once it gets to that portion of our presentation. Of course, tonight's presentation is called Myths and Mystics, and it features Megan Volpert and Erin Keane. They're here to celebrate the release of their new books, Straight into Darkness, a Tom Petty as rock mystic, and Erin's book, Runaway, Notes on Myths That Made Me. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our guests this evening, and then I'll turn it over to them. Megan Volpert is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary studies at Kennesaw State University and a fellow at the American Institute for Philosophical and Cultural Thought. She is a frequent contributor to Pop Matters and has written or edited more than a dozen books, including Boss Broad, which won the Georgia Author of the Year Award. Erin Keane is a critic, poet, essayist, and journalist. She's the author of 3 collections of poetry and editor of the Louisville Anthology. Her writing has appeared in many publications and anthologies, and in 2018, she co-produced and co-hosted a limited audio series, These Miracles Were, a hold steady podcast. She is the editor-in-chief at Salon, where she has worked since 2014, and teaches the Sina Jeter Naslin Karen Mann Graduate School of Writing at Spalding University. We're so glad to have both of these brilliant authors here. We will be shortly putting a link to Kara's Books and More, our bookseller for this evening. So if you'd like to order a copy of these books, please do so by clicking on that link and ordering them from Kara's Books and More, one of the oldest feminist bookstores in the United States. So once again, please join me to welcome Megan Volpert and Erin Keane. Megan?
Woo!
Thank you so much. That wonderful introduction.
Thanks,
Hey,
Jo.
Megan.
Hey, Erin. We will have to make our own fanfare because the audience is on mute. It will be great. We will assume that we are in a stadium with 7,000 people who are all waving lighters at us.
Ready to rock. They are ready to rock, yes.
Truly, truly. Thank you so much for agreeing to hang out with me for an hour. I don't know who else is here to do the hanging out, but I'm just excited for you and me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm loving the book, and I love Tom Petty. And I think that it's so wonderful now that he's really, I think it is, I think, a little sad that he's, after he's gone, that he's getting so much due right now. But the deep consideration of Tom Petty's work is long overdue, I think. And I'm really enjoying your take on it.
Woo woo. That's because you're on book tour and you have nothing to do except listen to Tom Petty radio for hours and hours and hours. But that's okay. I work from home and I also have nothing to do but listen to Tom Petty for hours.
If you guys at watching along don't know, if you have Sirius XM and you have the Tom Petty channel, and on the Tom Petty channel you can actually hear Tom Petty DJing, because they play recordings of his old sets of the show that he would do, where he would just be like, here's Tom Petty's favorite from the vault songs that he loved so much. And it's the wildest experience to tune it in. I was driving to Cleveland and I thought, I'm gonna listen to some Tom Petty radio and get in the mood. And I'm listening and I'm like, is that Tom himself? Or if you work at on the Tom Petty channel, do you just naturally like get hired because you kind of sound like Tom? Like I was like, I don't know until I was like, no, that's Tom Petty. Actually, it's like from
That
beyond
Buried
the
Treasure show
grave.
is good.
He's
Yeah.
still DJing for us. I love that.
Okay. All right. Let's we should read the people something so that they know why we care about this at all.
Absolutely. So Megan and I decided that we would rock, paper, scissors to see who would go first.
Yeah.
So are we ready?
Yeah, one round, winner goes first.
Great.
Clear enough?
Yes.
Okay. And no Spocks, no lizards, no other BS.
I don't know any of those rules.
Good
I
old
don't
fashioned
understand
rock,
that.
paper, scissors.
There's rock, there's paper, and there's scissors. That's it.
So we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, shoot. And on shoot, we're gonna show our hands, okay?
Okay.
All right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, shoot.
Go first, Megan. Scissors, cuts, paper.
I shall read first. That will be very clarifying about this Tom Petty stuff here.
Mute and fade into the background for a minute.
But don't fade too far because you are my sole audience, sister. Okay. I know Joe is there somewhere too. All right. So hey Joe. So I'm going to read one long piece that's going to leave you in like a kind of messy existential tizzy. And then I'm going to read a short piece that brings you like back down to the real life reality of having to put your pants on one leg at a time so that we can end on a sort of warm, fuzzier note. Okay. Yesterday, November 2nd, was the 40th anniversary of Tom Petty's least appreciated album, Long After Dark. And I have written an entire book about why it is important to appreciate Long After Dark, and specifically a song on that album that's literally saved my life, which is Straight Into Darkness, which is also the title of the book. I think the album is a really underrated kind of manual for creatives who are facing existential crises, as Petty was when he was working on this album. So the first thing I'm going to read you is in celebration of this album that you should take time to listen to this week because it's turning 40 and that's cool. Which is of course something that I would say because I just turned 41 very recently. So I have to think that everything that's 40 years old now is the greatest. Okay, here we go. Long After Dark is too often waved away as perhaps the least notable album Petty ever made. Even albums like The Last DJ or Echo are given more attention because at least the former is a controversial knock at the music business and the latter is a testament to Petty's personal struggles with divorce and heroin. Long After Dark is worthy of more intense consideration because it marks an end, after which would come different producers, collaborations with many of Petty's elders, solo albums, and other serious stabs at newness or reinvention. This fifth album bookmarks 1982 as Petty's reckoning with the absurd, with the ceaselessly repetitive and uselessly empty cycle of success for a rock star. He began to worry about the trap of, quote, his years living inside the album cycle, end quote. According to Warren Zanes, Petty would, quote, write the songs, go into the studio, make the record, mix it, master it, set up the release, do press, tour behind the record, write the songs, go into the studio, make the record. And 30 years later, if you're lucky enough to get that many years, your kids are grown-ups. Petty has spent most of his life at work, end quote. Journalist Steve Pond reported that it was Petty driving Petty mad into a time of prolific waste. Quote, for months, the schedule was monotonous. Record, break while Petty wrote more songs, record, break. The band would tell Petty to write one song, he'd return with 5. The record had too many rockers. Petty would go home and write ballads. When there got to be too many ballads, he started ditching them like crazy. I was trying to find the right balance, he says, end quote. He was overdoing it with no results, looking for balance, but finding monotony instead. The album was yielding nothing new. Petty's weariness with Long After Dark functions as proof that he had finally and totally awakened to the absurdity of his own stardom. As Camus defined it, quote, this divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, is properly the feeling of absurdity. All healthy men having thought of their own suicide, it can be seen without further explanation that there is a direct connection between this feeling and the longing for death, end quote. Whether Petty would recover from his crisis of stardom consciousness or suicidally drive his music career into the ground remained to be seen in 1982, but he was on the precipice of the only line of inquiry that ever mattered to existentialism, since judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. The instinctual nature of this moment is pretty dangerous because, quote, an act like this is prepared within the silence of the heart, as is a great work of art. The man himself is ignorant of it, end quote. Petty's passion for making great music, according to Camus, is located in the same spot as our human impulse to end it all with self-sabotage. He was trying to pour all this rock and roll mojo into Long After Dark, but it just would not gel. It had no resonance for him despite all his labors. Quote, at this point in his effort, man stands face to face with the irrational, says Camus. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world, end quote. A musician can walk away from this darkness, from the world that won't properly answer back, but then the music itself is lost. So the issue is whether Petty was called to music to such an extent that he would refuse to walk away from it, even though producing this music was precisely the thing that was causing him so much pain. Quote, from the moment absurdity is recognized, it becomes a passion, the most harrowing of all. But whether or not one can live with one's passions, whether or not one can accept their law, which is to burn the heart they simultaneously exalt, that is the whole question, end quote. He didn't walk away. He picked up the problem and ran with it. Zanes had said, quote, the almost ceaseless movement between writing, recording, going home to his family, and working through the band's affairs had begun to define who he was. He was a working man. The old gang wasn't the same because, as he put it, someone had to be the adult here. To lead a band is to assume responsibility for its challenges, perhaps especially its existential ones. Zanes has specifically of Long After Dark said that making the album was, quote, a matter of Petty wanting to avoid trouble that might come from the guys he'd known since high school, while recognizing that he'd been in that situation for years. He couldn't have what he thought of as a real band and not find himself there, but the fatigue of that and the fatigue of the album cycle itself were both weighing on Petty. The Heartbreakers, too, were struggling with the relentlessness and its cumulative effects, end quote. What Petty knew instinctively of the Heartbreakers' ups and downs thus far was that, quote, if the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy, end quote. To shift toward darkness as a metaphor for the same, Camus said, quote, there is no sun without shadow, and it is essential to know the night. The absurd man says yes, and his efforts will henceforth be unceasing. Petty went straight into that darkness and met the relentlessness of absurdity with his own unceasing work. He finished Long After Dark by taking joy in writing through his existential crisis. Camus said, one does not discover the absurd without being tempted to write a manual of happiness. The clearest example of such a manual on Long After Dark is Straight into Darkness. Journalist Bill Flanagan remarked of the album, quote, I really thought it might be his best. Straight into Darkness hit me very powerfully, but looking back, knowing what we know about all that would come, it feels too much like they're at risk of repeating the formula. They're going to loosen up, but it happens after that album, end quote. Petty similarly appraised Straight into Darkness as a really, really good song. I think that was a better record than we got credit for at the time. It's like, oh yeah, they've got a hit song on the radio, but it wasn't really applauded. What am I to do? Spoiled and mistreated, right? Of the totality of the album, he concluded, I think it's a good album. The last time I heard it, it was pretty good. The only thing I could say I didn't like about it was that it wasn't really going forward enough for me. I think it's imperative that you move everything forward with each recording. It was sort of a tread water album. We're doing what we're supposed to do here. We're not really going forward, end quote. Yet they plunged headlong into the tour. Quote, the Heartbreakers got on a leased plane, the Phantom, with a line from Long After Dark's The Same Old You painted on the side. Let that sucker blast. Off they went into America to play those songs. The tagline on the side of the Phantom was about the joys of life on the road. Indeed, the Heartbreakers always got more excited for their cycle to swing toward touring, away from recording. The tour was weirdly sponsored by Tecate beer, but the band needed stronger stuff to push their existential crisis into any kind of remission. Keyboardist Benmont Tench said, quote, on the Long After Dark tour, I discovered how much cocaine there was in the world, end quote. By the time the tour was wrapping, Petty said, quote, I started to take it all too seriously. I really wanted to part the Red Sea every night. I felt I had to. If we hadn't taken the break, I think we might have split up because I was bored, end quote. Mike Campbell called the break after this tour the dark period. Campbell checked himself into the hospital for exhaustion. Tench went to rehab for drugs and alcohol. Said Camus, in a man's attachment to life, There is something stronger than all the ills of this world. The body's attachment is as good as the mind's, and the body shrinks from annihilation, end quote. They hadn't quite run themselves into the ground completely, but they had each pushed it pretty close. Said Camus, killing yourself amounts to confessing. It is confessing that life is too much for you, or that you do not understand it. It is merely confessing that it is not worth the trouble. Living, naturally, is never easy, end quote. Touring isn't easy either, perhaps especially when supporting a lackluster album, yet in order to keep alive, the absurd cannot be settled. It escapes suicide to the extent that it is simultaneous awareness and rejection of death, end quote. So the Heartbreakers went on a break, their unsettled fate underscored by a less than blockbuster tour. The cycle of Tom Petty's existence that pertains to Long After Dark, writing it, recording it, touring it, promoting it, and otherwise in every possible moment living it, was indeed among his darkest. Camus provides cold comfort in that, at last, man will again find there the wine of the absurd and the bread of indifference on which he feeds his greatness. Let us insist again on the method. It is a matter of persisting. Long After Dark is a true testament to Petty's greatness, most simply because he persisted in creating it, despite its absurdity, despite its repetitiveness of composition, its aimlessness of lyric, the expansive yawn of the audience on tour, and the expensive promotional void of MTV. We need not speculate what was on Petty's individual mind in 1982. Said Camus, "It is probably true that a man remains forever unknown to us, and that there is in him something irreducible that escapes us. But practically, I know men, and I recognize them by their behavior, by the totality of their deeds, by the consequences caused in life, by their presence," end quote. By this method, we have good reason to restore a sense of majesty to Long After Dark as we evaluate Straight into Darkness by its consequences for the totality of Petty's later deeds. Okay, so that's the long essay about how not to kill yourself over your art and to keep persisting in making art, despite the fact that it is very difficult to do sometimes, and that we feel a lot of pressure to do it well. The whole midsection of the book is a discussion of just the one song, Straight Into Darkness, how it personally has impacted me, how it impacted the remainder of Petty's career during his lifetime and afterwards. It's an analysis of the lyrics. It's an analysis of the poetry of that, also of the composition of the song, musically speaking. And also in there is plenty of memoir about the times I have gone to Tom Petty shows and the crazy things that have happened to me there. This is a story about the second to last show Tom Petty ever did at Red Rocks. It is short. I will leave you with this, and then it will be Erin's turn. On a map, Red Rocks looks like a navigational nightmare. When you actually go there and see it, it bears no resemblance to the map. There is so much waiting in the car as the line slowly wends its way toward the box office entrance, in the line for tickets that stretches out over a mile of blacktop sloping further up the ridge, in the car again to one of 5 parking lots, across a mile of stairs in front of a security gate. Red Rocks presents many obstacles to the huge audiovisual payoff that it promises, and it is hard to determine a strategy no matter how many times you have been there. The lady in line behind us at the gate repeatedly worried that she should have gone up to get down rather than going down to get up, as we did. And she was from Denver. She was from there, but the trial began much earlier. The box office opened 4 hours before the show began. Mindy and I got separated. She parked the rental minivan while I stood in the line for the tickets with my name on them. Red Rocks holds just under 10,000 people, and maybe 2,000 of them were in the box office line in front of me. After 15 minutes and no visible movement, a staffer materialized, walking down the line and asking if anybody had a last name beginning with S through Z. "That's me!" She said, "Go to the front. There's no line at your window." So I stepped out and I vaulted over 1,000 people. And as I ascended to the plaintive groans of folks with ordinary last names like Johnson and Carter, the staffer said, "I guess Tom Petty loves people with weird last names." I paused to reflect on the names of other people who have most extensively studied Tom Petty. Zanes, Zolo. After handing over my identification, I was given a small stapled packet of cards. The front one had my name and billing address on it. Then there were 2 tickets and a receipt, and then 3 more cards. Those three, stapled to mine, belonged to one Kelly Voorhees of Austin, Texas. Kelly's seats were in the 4th row. Mine were in the 53rd row. Mandy had dumped the van in the first available spot on the side of the road like everyone was doing and hiked back to find me puzzling over the ticket error. Should we return Kelly's tickets to the box office? Should we use Kelly's tickets ourselves? Should we scalp them? Scalp ours and use Kelly's. The seats were so good. I blew an entire paycheck to be here. We returned the tickets to the box office. The lady in the window verified the error immediately. It seems Kelly had been in front of me in the line somewhere. They had printed new tickets when this set was discovered missing. The lady turned to the other staffers in the box office and said, "Mystery revealed, people. This kind, honest woman just returned the Voorhees pack that was lost. The packs were stapled together. Be careful what you're doing." We passed the first test. The Red Rocks box office dubbed us kind and honest women. Next, we would choose a parking lot. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope Straight into Darkness has something to offer you. Maybe the Q&A will help with that a little. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, Erin Keane.
Thank you, Megan. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. I will endeavor to follow it with, but perhaps less, a bit more of a somber tone than the triumphant Red Rocks. I always forget the quote, but like basically the dubbing of you as like a moral force in that ticket line, I thought was by the authority, who's always, of course, the woman behind the plexiglass. I thought was just wonderful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to read from a couple of sort of two strands of a braided essay in Runaway, and what all you need to really know for this, and I do allude to, is that my mother was a teenage runaway. She ran away from home when she was 13, hitchhiked all around the country, had adventures and misadventures, met my father when she was 15, in New York City, living as an adult on her own. And they got married, and he was 36 when they got married. He died when I was 5. My mother was one of the primary sources for this book when I finally, much older than I probably should have been, started asking questions essentially about why nobody stopped my father from marrying a literal child. So this is called Jersey Girls. Once I got it in my head to go visit the girl skeleton at the Smithsonian, I couldn't shake it. Her name was New Jersey Skeleton 1972, but everyone called her Sandy, forever 15, presented to the museum's anthropology department by the police. A strange gift. I learned about her existence in a book published the year I was born about the epidemic of teen runaways between the late 60s and early 70s. My mother is the only grown-up teen runaway I know, but she was apparently a drop in a wave. New Jersey Skeleton 1972 was the phantom girl I was taught to fear becoming myself. The girl with the trusting smile, the girl with the grabbed wrist, the girl kept in the room, the girl dumped in a ditch. Sandy had been spotted hitchhiking near the Jersey Shore in the spring of 1971, around the same time my mother left home the second time for good. 6 months later, 2 hunters discovered Sandy's body in a gravel pit on the side of US 30 near Egg Harbor, with nothing but a hotel key in the pocket of her flared denim trousers. There was a man, isn't there always? But he was cleared by the cops, deemed a good enough guy, though he was also old enough to book himself and Sandy into a motel and buy her the bell-bottoms she had on when she died. In America's Runaways, Christine Chapman reports what the man told the police, that she said her name was Sandy, but he didn't believe her, that she was on her way to Atlantic City to get a summer job with no bag, no nothing. He took care of her, bought her clothes, fed her, got them a motel room, and spent the night there. He went off to work in the morning, and when he came back 2 days later, she was gone. He seemed kind, and she needed a place to stay, Chapman writes, though Sandy's bones could not corroborate this account. After waiting for her at the motel for 2 days without calling the police, the man checked out and returned to his routine and forgot about Sandy until New Jersey police confronted him with the fact of her death. For 6 months, he told no one about the girl who had vanished. Nobody tied a known missing person to the bones found in a roadside gravel pit. He seemed kind. 6 months after that, in 1972, the cops gave her body, a young and recent specimen, a rare prize for the anthropology department, to the Smithsonian, where they read her bones to see what stories she might tell. Teenagers are an abstraction, a Smithsonian anthropologist told Chapman. Until you know one, as I know Sandy, they are not very real to you. But did she know Sandy? What could she know of her? Like Bruce Springsteen's Sandy, the South Jersey girl he pleads with in his song 4th of July, Asbury Park, she is a creation, a composite of every girl who took off from or towards something and ended up in a drawer, attached forever to some guy's story that frames him as the hero, the one who tried to save her and lost something of himself in the process. Imagine being left with only that. Could Madame Marie read this Sandy's fortune better than the cops could? What would she make of that man in the motel room? Of Sandy's parents who never claimed her? Of the Smithsonian, that temple of knowledge? 9 years after Sandy was found and donated to the museum, my mother, her long brown hair in braids pinned up on her head, pulled a cotton bikini from her dresser and folded it into a bag as my wail bounced off the wood floors of my parents' bedroom in our Jersey City apartment. The place smelled like incense and an aroma I would recognize much later as weed. She sat me down on the bed to explain that she was going down the shore for the weekend with her friends, and no, I couldn't come. She wanted a weekend away, that was all. She was 23 years old with a heartbreaker face, a weekend bag, and a red-faced preschooler racked with sobs on the bed. What she needed was a few days off to be herself, to not be anyone's mother. I was heaving and gulping. That she'd consider leaving me behind for a minute, let alone a whole weekend, was an outrage. I watched her zip her bag, my little face a red mask of righteous fury. How old is a girl when her intuition arrives? Surely not this young. And yet maybe it's an evolutionary correction designed to give us a running start. Or it could be something we're born with that we spend years finding our way back to. I could not have known anything in that moment about what my mother had missed by leaving home at 13, getting married at 15, and having her first child before most girls her age finished high school, let alone what one weekend down the shore with childless young women her own age could have done to restore even just a part of that girl she had been when she first left home. I just knew I didn't want her to leave. I didn't want her to taste life without us. I emailed the collection manager of archaeology and ethnology in the Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology to ask about Sandy. I wanted to see her. I couldn't quite articulate why in a way that didn't make me sound like a weirdo with a true crime podcast. Maybe I wanted to reassure her that someone remembered her, even if it was someone she had never met, someone who wasn't even alive when she died. Maybe it was to confront the end I grew up fearing the most. This collection manager couldn't help me, but he referred me to one of the museum's forensic anthropologists. He also couldn't help, but he referred me to another anthropologist who had been at the museum when Sandy was admitted to the collection. That senior anthropologist had no recollection of this specimen, as he called her, and he referred me back to the forensic anthropologist. The emails were polite, but dizzying. How could a missing girl go missing again decades later? The first time was a tragedy. Losing her again was a farce. At my persistent request, the forensic anthropologist took a closer look at the records and discovered that Sandy had been deaccessioned from the collection. These are restricted files, so I will have to go to the National Anthropological Archives to look at this file and see what documentation is in this file, he told me. If you want to access the file, you will have to get written permission on letterhead from the Atlantic County Medical Examiner's office. When I looked for a contact there, I found yet another roadblock. The Atlantic County Medical Examiner's office had vanished, along with, presumably, its letterhead, the casualty of a bureaucratic merger. Once again, Sandy lay in limbo, unclaimed. I tried to deaccession her from this story, to put her out of my mind, but I couldn't. Maybe on a cellular level, I understood something about my mother's capacity for wildness, her ability to morph into a new identity to save herself, to sense when the moment was right to wriggle away. After all, she had done it before, though I did not know that then. I didn't know how old I was when I understood my mother was different from other mothers. It must have been a gradual awakening to the truth of her, pieced together from context clues and overheard adult conversations, pockmarked with gaps nobody wanted to fill in. But to a small child, the most frightening thing imaginable is how easily a mother could slip into a different life, simple as a sundress she could stroll in down the boardwalk in a seaside town where nobody knows her. I may have been just a little kid, unable to fathom that there could be a party happening somewhere that didn't include me. But maybe there was another reason besides blunt umbrage that caused me to flip out at the idea of her going down the shore and leaving me behind. I was inconsolable, and she had a choice to make. 10 minutes later, we were sitting side by side on our front stoop, a backpack for me next to her bag. I did not yet have any way of appreciating how nimbly my mother could improvise and change course without admitting defeat. This was still going to be her girls' weekend, just like she'd planned. But I had made my case and secured my passage. I thought that she could be my big sister on this trip. She could pretend she was just babysitting me. I leaned against her as we waited, pulling my sleeves over my curled fists and believing with all my tiny heart that I had just won a clean fight. 8 of us crammed into that bungalow in Asbury Park. It was a quintessential girls' weekend down the shore, the stuff of Springsteen songs. The boardwalk, the arcade, the beach, beers for them and ice cream for me, the doted-on pet, the little sister of the weekend. Mom and I got a room to ourselves while the rest of the girls bunked up together. This was a test, I believed at the time, and we both passed. I had proven my devotion to her by refusing to let her out of my sight, and she had proven to me that even if she went to the literal end of the earth, she would take me with her. I found the right form to submit to the Consolidated New Jersey Southern Regional Medical Examiner's office, and I mailed my request for a letter of permission to view Sandy's files in the National Anthropological Archive, which I acknowledged was a little odd. A medico-legal death investigator emailed me back. She couldn't release any information about Sandy to me because the case of her death, while cold, was still open. She gave me what she could: a missing persons number to look up in the national database, and an offer to have a staff anthropologist run DNA or dental records of any missing person I might suspect could be Sandy against her records. Stay safe, she signed off. I plugged Sandy's number into the database. There she was in more detail than I thought possible. She was small, 5'3", 118 pounds. She dyed her hair, which was found in shades of blonde, brown, and red-brown. Body discovered in woods off Jim Leeds Road near milepost number 42 of the Garden State Parkway in Galloway Township, New Jersey, it read. All parts recovered, not recognizable, near or complete skeleton. She wore a ribbed blue cotton or synthetic shirt, white, blue, and orange striped canvas or cotton trousers of the hip hugger variety, underwear and a white bra, and brown leather sandals, all found on her body. On her wrist, she wore a wide brown leather band inlaid with small brass grommets, a delicate lady's West clock watch embedded in it, a perfect contradiction of girlish and rocker style. And there was her face, or at least several artistic renderings of it, no two looking alike. A couple of scowling, crude police sketch composites from 1971 and 72, one 3D computer model in which she looked a bit like Mariel Hemingway the year she filmed Manhattan. One girl can be so many girls all at once. There was also one more recent portrait, home-trimmed bangs framing her alert eyes, her mouth almost ready to smile at a man's jokes. I found myself feeling attached to Sandy, but I was just the latest person to fail her. I had no leads for the medico-legal death investigator's cold case, no DNA for the anthropologist to cross-reference against hers. I had nothing to give this girl. I wanted someone to know, the clothing store clerk, the motel manager, the diner waitress, the man who bought her those striped hip huggers and then forgot about her until the police came calling, that a girl doesn't just vanish as if she never existed. Where was Sandy going when she met the man who bought her new clothes, fed her at a diner, and then took her back to a motel? When did she decide to name herself Sandy, leaving her given name behind? If she had a little sister, had that sister ever visited the Smithsonian on a school field trip, or later as a parent taken her own kids without even knowing whose secrets the anthropology department contained? I thought about what she had told the man who seemed kind, about her plan to go to Atlantic City and find work. In Springsteen's Atlantic City, which I love for its Catholic embrace of redemption through sacrifice and resurrection, the protagonist attempts to explain to his girl why he's pinning his last hopes for the future on a desperate crime. The song's a mournful confession and, depending on how you hear it, possibly not entirely truthful. He has insurmountable debts, but he doesn't mention how they may have been incurred. Resentful and bitter over his lot, he is willing to gamble on his path, which he knows is a cheat, and bring her along with him into the aftermath. All he asks of her is that she fix herself up nice and be there waiting after he does a favor that presumably will lead to the squaring of his debts. We don't know if the girl believed him or not, if she ripped up the ticket or pinned her hair up and put on her lipstick and went after her man. We don't get to know how she felt when he failed to show up, as this doomed man almost certainly did at their boardwalk meeting spot. The song is not her story. Sandy's bones couldn't tell me hers either. And I'll stop there.
Woo!
Yay! Hello.
Lovely. Lovely.
Oh, Sandy. My mother's
Indeed.
response to that story was very heartbreaking. She started to, she looked at the timing of it and wondered, is this a girl that she had maybe met on the road, being on the East Coast at that time? She didn't know. She couldn't say. There were so many, kids in and out at that time. But I was just heartbroken that she was like, did I fail her? And I'm like, Mom, you were also literally a child.
I know, there, but for the grace of God go I, right? As you say,
Exactly.
so many girls are one girl, or one girl can be so many girls. Yeah.
All right. Well, so one thing, Megan, that I thought was really an interesting commonality between our books is that they both are kind of hinge on a personal epiphany. So could you tell us a little bit about the epiphany that kind of launched your deep dive into this song?
Yeah.
And then I can share mine and maybe we can go from there.
Yeah. You can tell by the context of the album discussion, mine was a brief suicidal ideation. I have a very painful autoimmune disease. I've been in remission for a long time. I'm okay. But I have ulcerative colitis, and I had this pain in my gut that was just overwhelming for so many months that I became really malnourished and kind of lost my mind, as what happens with trauma to the body that severe, And so one day I was taking the MARTA, the train here in Atlanta, up to the north suburbs to go and teach at the high school. And I just was like, it seems better if I just fall over onto these train tracks than get on the train and go to do my job for one more day, and it just was like a relaxing into that feeling, and I could feel myself relaxing into it. And I had my headphones on, fortunately, and the song that came on was Straight Into Darkness. And the chorus of the song goes, the bridge verse, I don't believe the good times are over. I don't believe the thrill is all gone. Real love is a man's salvation. The weak ones fall and the strong carry on. And I thought, that still seems pretty effing true. So that's a reason to live. And so then I got on the train instead of going under the train, which was awesome. And then the next day I went to the emergency room and spent 2 weeks in the hospital, like a smart person should have done from the get-go. But so that song really just, you know, there's lots of songs like that in Petty's catalog or in any number of other musicians' catalogs, but it just hit me right at the moment when I needed to hear something, anything. And so here we are. How about you?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, like, when, you know, when those of us who are big fans of the music that we love, when we say like music can save your life, it literally can, like, and that's something that I think sometimes people kind of think that that's hyperbole, but it's not. Even just one well-timed, perfectly written rock song can change everything for you.
Truly.
Yeah, mine was a different sort of epiphany, but it kind of changed everything about how I saw my life and my family. So for a long time, as an adult who should have known better, one of my favorite movies was Woody Allen's Manhattan. And I watched all the Woody Allen movies, but Manhattan was the one that I came back to again and again. And I just really loved the aesthetics of it. I loved the jokey quips or what have you. And this was sort of in that, period of time in like late 90s through the aughts and such, when like the particulars of why Woody Allen was, sort of is now widely, basically a pariah. The particulars of those had kind of like sunk into like, was that just tabloid gossip ? A little bit of like, people had sort of shoved that out of the way and like, okay, we can just go back to watching these movies. And I never questioned what is this movie saying about whether it's okay for grown men to date teenagers. I think I had this sort of this idea. I believed that like, well, it's fiction. It's not really trying to make a moral statement, right? That was sort of how I thought about it. But I also did not ever realize that probably the reason why I love this movie so much is because my parents also had this kind of age gap relationship, and that because my father died when I was so young, and he sort of remained in that way kind of like a celebrity to me, someone who I felt very deeply attached to, but also was kind of ultimately unknowable because he also died when I was 5-6 years old. So I was writing Mariel Hemingway's memoir came out, and she had written about this encounter she had with Woody after they finished making Manhattan. And I realized, oh, wow, yeah. So like there wasn't really a lot of daylight between the fantasy on the film and the fantasy maybe in the filmmaker's head. But as I was writing about this, I thought, well, I have to be kind of honest here. At this point in 2015 or what have you, like I was very over Woody Allen's whole deal, the person, the movies, etc. But like I felt, okay, well, it's important to be honest. Like I'm not going to front like, well, I always thought he was trash. Like I have this like body of I have written about this movie before. Like I have a paper trail. So I thought, well, it's probably I need to just be upfront about where I'm coming from on this, and just go ahead and admit before you pull this you on me that this was me and here's where I'm coming from now. And I'm like writing this piece and realizing in real time that, oh, I bought into this movie because I bought into this fantasy of my parents' relationship, that I had never really questioned it as anything other than like sort of gritty glam, like kind of like a rock star-ish kind of story from the 70s that seemed way cooler to me than literally anything else in my life as I was growing up.
Because if we can't get it to approach a sense of glamorization, then we're forced to admit some modicum of victimization. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this is, man, I'm knee deep in research for a book I'm working on called Why Alanis Morissette Matters. Self-explanatory what that book is about. And so I've been steeping myself in all this 90s culture, and it's awesome. I go back and I watch The Craft and I'm like, dang, this movie empowered the living daylights out of me when I was a 16-year-old girl. But I look at it now and I'm like, look how many moralizing messages there are about how these women should not be as witchy as they are. That's disappointing because I was with them all the way.
The 90s were
many instances like that.
Yeah. So I've just turned 46. So I'm a little older than you, I think, but like same general era. And so coming of age in the 90s was such a strange time, I feel like, because yes, I self-identified as a feminist, and I was raised by a feminist, but like not a gender studies feminist. My mom didn't even go to high school. Like she got her GED and went to nursing school, but like, so I basically had this idea that like, well, women can do anything men can do, and they should definitely be paid the same amount. And like, but like beyond that, and the cultural messages that we got were so mixed and strange. Like I write about this a little bit in the end of my book, but the speaking of movies, the movie Beautiful Girls, like a late 90s movie, and in it the idea is that like it's so hard for the character played by Timothy Hutton to turn 30 that he basically just gets into this emotional affair with a 13-year-old next door, which played by Natalie Portman, who then like apparently later said in interviews has spent a couple of decades of her life like being very overtly serious, guarded person as far as her public persona goes, because she was so creepily sexualized by fans and stuff who were watching her movies when she was playing always these sort of like old soul little girls. And I remember that movie, I loved that movie too, of course, completely not, when I came back to it later, I was like, in that one, because it's the 90s, it's the 13-year-old saying, well, I'll wait for you instead of the other way. Like that was the feminist
because
twist, Megan.
That's what passes for female empowerment in the 1990s.
That was our feminist twist. We were and I was like, well, sure, she should get to have the same, like, like it's a twist.
Yeah, like because it's very much like, well, girls might as well take ownership of their own sexuality because they're going to be sexualized anyway. And that is so much in music too. So much in music. Like I may as well own this because it's coming at me whether I like it or not. You know what I mean? This is a runaway train. And I just have to act like it's rock and roll and it's cool, because if I don't, then I'm just a victim of my circumstances, or I asked for it or something,
Yeah. Or also you're also just like the hag who broke up the band.
Strange time to be a feminist.
Yeah.
The
Craft versus Clueless. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I do want to say that in trick-or-treating, we moved to a new neighborhood over the summer. This is our first trick-or-treating season in this new place, and we had some great tweens who were like good middle school, maybe freshmen in high school, still dressing up in trick-or-treating, which I love. And we had a perfect Cher Horowitz, and I thought someone is raising the children right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting contrast too, because those were really also, there was a bit of that shift in the mid-90s, like what were those, like 96, I think, and definitely a bit of a shift toward, it was like Cher was of course the the queen bee, but she wasn't like the mean queen bee about it, right? Like there was definitely this difference between like, oh, you could be the sort of aspirational popular girl that everybody likes and not be at the same time, like in The Craft, the blonde girl who's trying to ruin everyone's lives. And I did think that was definitely better in role model of like how to use your social power wisely.
Yeah. And that has Shakespearean roots too, which The Craft can't really lay claim to. And as a result,
Jane Austen, right? It was Emma, I think that they. Yeah. But
dead white women, that's totally different.
Right. Well, so go.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is interesting to put the two side by side because they are about creatives. Witchcraft is really just a metaphor for creative use of the resources that are at your disposal and of the earth. And then, Clueless is about the use of financial resources, but moreover, just the creativity of her fashion and how she really used that to articulate what life should be like for her and for the person that she gives a makeover to during the course of the film. And and so those two I think are about artistry as a weapon of feminism
and female friendship too. That was really nice to actually see in like movies where you had girls talking to each other and having each other's backs and not being just like the girlfriend or the muse or the manic pixie girls that came after or whatever.
The mild subplot, right? The mild subplot, the way that you explain Springsteen's Sandy song,
Yes, just the object, right? The object. Which so that does lead me to a point from your book that I really loved is when you were, because I'm a lyrics overanalyzer as well as, you know, clearly my like too close reading of Atlantic City shows. Whoops. Sorry about that. External camera. And so I really appreciated in your book your breakdown of like why Tom Petty's use of girl and woman, sort of like the counting of how many girls are in Tom Petty songs on different albums, how many women, and how he uses those. And that, because that is something that I think about, like, is girl problematic in a pop song? I don't know. Is it? Megan, what do you think?
Sometimes. Yeah. I mean, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon is a song.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Made my skin crawl. Absolutely.
But I was going to jump in, since you mentioned that. What was the movie where they used that? Was it a Tarantino movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the Urge Overkill cover that was in Pulp Fiction. And yeah, at least it wasn't, you know, literally like about a girl, but there is just something kind of like icky about that. Like, because some songs where it's like, you're just 16, like you're supposed to be imagining that like it's just a bunch of 16-year-olds at the sock hop or whatever in the 50s and early 60s, you know, at the dance, because the idea really was that like rock and roll is like kids music back then, you know, before we all got old, thank goodness, beats the alternative. But I do think that like some songs then sort of veer into the context of them, like Jerry Lee Lewis just passed away, and you know, some of the obituary treatments have been they've differed in how they address the fact that he married a literal child illegally, surreptitiously, and then basically the world kind of let her take the fall for his cancellation, his big fall from grace. So, but I always think of High School Confidential when I think of Jerry Lee Lewis and think like, I don't know, man, like was that really a song that he was, you know, at that point was still like dying to play that in public? Like, ugh.
As much as I love rock and roll, and as much as I get a kick out of Jerry Lee Lewis, he doesn't fall into that Woody Allen area for me somehow. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it's further into the past that I can't relate to anyway, in a certain sense. But when I think of High School Confidential, I always think of the Carol Pope tune and not the Jerry Lee Lewis tune, which is like a totally different, hyperqueer, super feminist, lovely experience of female gaze kind of objectification, you know? It's totally flips the script.
Yeah, I have beef with Jerry Lee basically because but Myra Lewis's books her memoirs are really fascinating if anybody's interested in like that the story behind that. And I guess I have beef with it because like the way that I learned about Jerry Lee Lewis was through the movie Great Balls of Fire, which is not a good movie. I'll just say, like, even in its heyday, it was like it's a bit of a mess as far as movies go, but it had Winona Ryder in it, who I thought was absolutely at that point in my life the coolest girl in the world, who I wanted to be more than anybody, and had a disturbingly hot Dennis Quaid as Jerry Lee, which, boy, they really took some liberties. Like Dennis Quaid, a lot better looking than Jerry Lee Lewis at the time. But the movie made it really seem like and it was based off of Myra's book, but the movie really just made it seem like it was a much like that this was like it treated the relationships in a very sort of titillating, sexy way that I thought was also very indicative of the time that the movie was made. But I always sort of like question when people are like, but it was a different time. So I'm like, Jerry Lee Lewis lost his career for quite a while, and it never hit the lengths that it should have when people found out that he married a girl that young. And his cousin. And so I always sort of think like, it's not because the English were so much more enlightened than us. It really was pretty scandalous what he did. And the real backstory behind it too is even sadder, but I won't spoil that for everyone who wants to read more sad stories. But
every band's got one. Every band's got at least one.
Pretty much. Is it question time?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to remind folks if they had any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And I'll sort of, maybe spitball a few things while folks are typing. So what I find interesting now that we've all admitted that we're in our 40s, and are sort of can do these cultural references, especially in the 90s, because now in your 40s, I think that we're of that generation where we were born like in the 70s, and like as cell phones, like as all of this technology started coming out, we had ended up with cell phones and Napster and now we've moved on to TikTok and whatnot, and we're sort of like scratching our heads. It's like, yeah, Napster, for all its faults, was probably better than TikTok. But how all of this stuff is sort of like coming back around. Like Fleetwood Mac's Dreamers, huge, still one of the hugest albums out there, became a TikTok dance and video where people were, it was dreams, just like walking or writing to Fleetwood Mac's Dreams. But there also seemed to be a disconnect with who wrote the song and who Fleetwood Mac was. And then I think it really became evident when Missy Elliott was at the Super Bowl and people thought it was great that they were supporting this like unknown artist. It's like, it's Missy Elliott. It's Missy, So yeah, it seems that, with the technological advances that we have and things that we have at our fingertips, like some of these things that, we listened to on the radio, or we went and bought the LP when the LP originally came out, that they're now happening, but there's no cultural point of reference for those things, especially, with music after it's been remade 5-6 times by different people.
I will, yeah, I'll
That's
say
good.
That I once said I was riding in the car with a friend who was like 10 years older than me and like just knew more about certain types of music than I did. And I think it was like, what is the Quiet Riot song that Slade did first? Like maybe that was that Come On Feel the Noise? But like I was like, oh, Quiet Riot, and they're like, that's Slade. And it was like, so some things kind of never change also, in that like the people who experience something for the first time do feel an ownership of it, or even just like have that knowledge, and we can decide how we share that with people. And like, do I want to be the record store clerk in the Kids in the Hall sketch who's like, best of albums are for housewives and little girls? Or do I want to just be like, yes, start with the best of album and like tell me what your favorite track is, and we'll go from there. Like we have choices to make, I feel like, as elders at this point.
I'm thinking about how I thought Because the Night was a Patti Smith song for ages, speaking of Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
But Joe, I don't disagree with anything you said. I just don't think it's bad. Like I don't have a negative value judgment to associate with it. Ideologically, we had to learn to start breaking ideas into smaller chunks. We shouldn't blame technology that we have the ability to do that now. We invented the kinds of technology we have because we needed the ability to break an album into 10 a la carte downloads. We needed that ability, right? But it doesn't destroy the album. Taylor Swift has proved that to everybody in America this week. You know what I mean? She's the only person ever, ladies first, rah, rah, right? She's the only person ever, not Beyonce, not Madonna, not Shania, not Celine. Taylor Swift filled the entire top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 this week with a la carte downloads and streams of track of her latest album. That's amazing. An album publicist, right? So, there's no like make media great again. That's not a thing. Technology is not to blame. And the circumstance you're describing is actually good, because it means that no one movie studio, no one music studio has a monopoly on what constitutes American or any other culture anymore. The internet is a democracy, and it shall be that way for time immemorial, whether Elon Musk likes it or not.
the best thing is that every time one of an old, like say a vintage song rises to prominence, like in this last season of Stranger Things with, when Kate Bush was running up that hill, then like everyone who writes, who helms a culture section of a site on the internet is assigning that like, write the explainer for people who are 15. This is the first time. Who is Kate Bush and why do you care? And where does this rank in her discography? And like, what can you now go discover? So I do think that like, because the internet giveth and taketh, of course, but so much more information is there. Like, I remember I had to really rely on like crummy gatekeepy kinds of dudes usually to learn things about music and pop culture when I was younger, that like once the internet, and then also just like leaving my small town and meeting more, non-male pop culture obsessives who could steer me in the right direction and turn me on to things like, I think if I had the internet when I was young to learn about things, I could have learned so much more, and I would have been so much, I don't know. There's a lot of possibility there.
But we are the last women who will ever have to face this kind of cultural conundrum, because the sisters that were born after us, they did have it. They have the interwebs.
They do, and they're breaking it with every Taylor Swift release. Good for them.
Yeah. Well, Taylor Swift's fans are 40 now as well.
It's true. It's true. Yes. Yes.
I
or
think
30, maybe not 40, but yeah.
And that's kind of one of those things, especially when I think about pop songs and pop artists, is that, when they first started and were young and in their early 20s, but were singing songs that were definitely consumable for 13, 14-year-olds, it's like, oh no, now those 13, 14-year-olds are of the mommy generation, and they're sitting in carpools rocking out to Taylor Swift, or downloading Taylor Swift while they're in the carpool lane and things like that. But speaking of the 90s, while we're still, what I also think is interesting too, because Megan, you said you were at the concert, is that I just watched on I think it was Netflix, the Woodstock 99. But we had the Woodstock 99, but we also had Lilith Fair. So we had these two sort of like competing, almost like cultural movements. You had Lilith Fair, and then you had what became the nightmare that was Woodstock 99. You're trying to create, peace, love, and rock and roll, in an area, in a time of, capitalism, like unbridled capitalism, and, where they were selling waters for $12, $13 when they started to run out of waters to kids, to teenagers who went to Woodstock to get that, feeling that their parents had going to that field in Pennsylvania.
Which in New York, which was also, they ran out of food. They like, if you really want the authentic Woodstock experience, it is dirty. There is no food.
Yeah.
You completely overwhelmed the infrastructure, and probably scratched the surface of that, and it wasn't as PC and lovey.
I think the real difference between the original Woodstock and the 99 reboot of Woodstock is that everybody had handheld cameras in their smartphones, right? Like, if we had been able to document the original Woodstock to the same extent that people documented the reboot, then we would know all kinds of like really disgusting, horrifying stuff that happened at Woodstock.
Yeah, the myth making around the baby boomers do they did such a bang up job with their own myth making. Speaking of myths, and I think about that also, like 75-year-old dudes are still listening to the Beatles sing "I Want to Hold Your Hand." So like that, I think that feeling of like loving the song that like made your heart skip when you were 15 and crushing so hard on somebody that you remember from then, like that just kind of never really leaves us, I think. And so that's, and I don't think it's that's something that I don't think is like just specific to say a contemporary pop fan or a Taylor Swift fan or something. Like they're still out, not only listening to it, but obsessively consuming every piece of media still released about the Beatles too. It's a very involved fandom, and good, and I said good for them for holding on to their passions too. Yeah.
Well, we have actually reached the top of the hour, but I know Megan just lightly teased about her Alanis Morissette book, but what are you working on, Erin? Or what's coming up next for you?
I just, this book actually didn't even get finished until this spring. So I haven't had that, like, we really kind of, my press was able to kind of push it out a little sooner than maybe traditionally what we would have had. So I haven't had like the good sort of like year to kind of marinate in a new project. So what I have are a bunch of things that I put aside to finish this book. So now I get to dig back into them and sort of see what still feels like something to me. So it is an era of possibility now.
And Megan, that Alanis Morissette book, when are we looking to see that hit a shelf?
That's for the 40th anniversary of Jagged Little Pill
Nice.
in 2025.
Excellent. Is that the University of Texas Press that does the wide,
Yes,
like the Patti Smith that?
Yeah.
Shout out to Karen's book too.
Yeah, that's a great book. The Ramones book is also great, and that's the whole Why Music Matters series is incredible, which no one is paying me to say, although I am paid by them to say things about Alanis Morissette. Yeah.
I can't wait for this book. Jagged Little Pill completely changed me also. It came out right when I had the first major breakup of like my sort of college tender heart. And so I just associate it so strongly with You Ought to Know that like I can't even, I have no distance, I have no chill, I have no objectivity.
Me neither. This is a hard one to write for that reason.
And I think at that time too, what did you say? Like Jagged Little Pill was a great anger song, and you had Melissa Etheridge's Come to My Window.
Yeah.
So like book ended both of those. Yeah, it was a good time for music. It was a really good time for music.
It was a great time for women in music.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Come to My Window became like that was an unabashed anthem that people could see car windows down on a hot summer day, howling it next to a stoplight. I don't care that you're pulling up next to me, sir. You're getting the full Melissa Etheridge concert experience right here, at the intersection of North Decatur and Claremont. Sorry about
Love it.
Yeah. Anyway, Erin, Megan, thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving us this fascinating conversation. Once again, if you would like to order copies of their books, they are the links to the Karis Books and More ordering is in the chat. We encourage you to do so. Karis Books and More is one of those fantastic independent bookstores. They did so much for the past few years during the pandemic, and we desperately need our independent bookstores to thrive because they are truly cornerstones of the community. And as I said earlier, Karis is one of the oldest and last standing feminist bookstores in the United States. So please do give them your support. Once again, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Erin. And we will see you all very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.